you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to rise today in our first day back in calendar 2023. I'm returning to a question that I put to the Honourable Minister of Environment on October 20th, 2022. It's important to note the date because of the Minister's response. My question cited the Liberal platform, which was, of course, in the election of 2021, in which they promised to, quote, establish and fully fund a Canada Water Agency in 2022. It was also promised that it would modernize the 50-year-old Canada Water Act. The Minister of Environment responded that we are, in fact, working to create an independent water agency for Canada. We need to pursue this. And then at the end of his response, he said, we will have good news to announce to this House in the coming weeks. Well, that was October 20th, 2022. And of course, it is true that the last week of January 2023 does fall within weeks after the answer that we received in October. But the nature of the minister's answer, I think it's fair to say, suggested something a bit sooner than sometime next year, and we're still waiting. We are now in a period of pre-budget work, and I think it's important to focus now on what the government must include in the budget if it's at all serious about creating a Canada Water Act. Now, we have the Canada Water Act, the Canada Water Agency. I note particularly, and it was encouraging to me at the time, that the Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change used the word independent to refer to this agency. I want to cite that we have quite a lot of good, solid work being done in the NGO community by groups like FLOW, groups across Canada that work on water policy. And there's a strong consensus that the Canada Water Agency must be independent of the Departments of Environment, Climate Change, as well as of Agriculture and Agri-Food, as well as of the Department of Natural Resources. There is a strong call to have an officer of the Chief Water Security to work through interjurisdictional blockages and ensure that this country has strong water policy. We know that we need to ensure that we have what we used to have in Canada, by the way, was cooperation and shared work between provinces and the federal government, with the federal government in the lead, on programs to avoid flooding. So floodplain work was shared, anticipating the vulnerabilities of our water system to floods, and making sure that we pay attention to water policy, particularly around our freshwater systems like the Great Lakes or Lake Winnipeg. It's extraordinarily important that we rebuild the scientific capacity that we once had in this country, and which is now down to precious little compared to what was there when I worked in the Minister of Environment's office back in the 80s. We had a robust program of Inland Waters Directorate in the area near Hamilton. We had a very strong department with hundreds of people working. It's virtually disappeared. So, Mr. Speaker, in the 15 seconds I have left, I'd like to push forward and say what happened to the coming weeks, what happened to the good news, and when are we going to see an independent Canada Water Agency that's fully funded to at least $1 billion a year, as promised in the platform?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the honourable member's question, and I appreciate it as well. The question she put to the minister on the 20th of October, and I appreciated his response. And because, Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member will agree, a clean and safe freshwater supply in Canada, freshwater systems from coast to coast to coast, they are essential to the well-being of Canadians, the health and sustainability of the environment and the economy. Freshwater sustains life on Earth. It supplies drinking water, grows food, and supports ecosystems. Mr. Speaker, from droughts to floods to deteriorating water quality, freshwater challenges are intensifying in this country, due in large part to climate change, and there are serious and costly impacts for Canadians and the environment. As part of the Government of Canada's commitment to protecting fresh water, Budget 2022 provided $88.1 million over 5 years in new funding for Environment and Climate Change Canada, which includes $19.6 million in the 2022-23 budget to sustain the Freshwater Action Plan. This is up for renewal, Mr. Speaker, but our funding efforts will now include cleanup efforts in the Great Lakes, the St. Lawrence River, Lake Winnipeg, Lake of the Woods, the Fraser River, from my colleague's home province, the St. John River, the Mackenzie River, and Lake Simcoe. $43.5 million starting in 2022-23 to create the new Canada Water Agency, which I will advise the honourable member will be stood up soon in the coming weeks, Mr. Speaker. And $25 million over 5 years starting in 2022-23 for the experimental lakes area in Northern Ontario to support freshwater science and research. And Mr. Speaker, you'll recall the Harper government tried to shutter that incredible global water resource, but our government is now funding it. Also, to the honourable member's point, we will be modernizing the Canada Water Act, and as she mentioned, 51 years it has been in place, almost unchanged, and Indigenous communities and climate change will be front and centre in our considerations. Mr. Speaker, in June 2021, Environment and Climate Change Canada published a What We Heard report. 1 minute? Well, Mr. Speaker, just to say, we consulted from coast to coast to coast, some 2,700 submissions. We heard strong support for the enhanced availability of data to support decision-making at all levels and cutting-edge science to tackle freshwater challenges, including climate change impacts. In addition to public engagement, the Government of Canada has also engaged with provinces, territories, and Indigenous peoples. And, Mr. Speaker, the Canada Water Agency is an institution for our time. It will bring people together on the watershed and the landscapes of this country to better protect and manage our fresh water, which we are so blessed to have. 20% of the world's fresh water, Mr. Speaker, in this beautiful country of ours. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to my honourable colleague, the Parliamentary Secretary, whom I know has a very strong affinity for these issues from working with him when we were both involved with the International Institute for Sustainable Development. I want to correct the record when I said near Hamilton. I can't believe I forgot that the Inland Waters Director, when it was strong, was in Burlington, Ontario, and did wonderful work. I am not comforted by what I've heard so far. Yes, we have the Experimental Lakes area, and it does great work. And yes, I'm glad we stopped the Harper government from destroying it. But the Canada Water Agency needs to be independent of other departments of government. It needs to be properly funded. We need to understand what's happening to our water. Even if we were not looking at a climate crisis, our approach to freshwater in this country has been pathetic for decades. We now are in a climate crisis, which is a water crisis, and the Canada Water Agency is urgently needed and must be properly funded. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would agree with many of the honourable member's points. The honourable member and I go back a long ways, as she has alluded, and again, I take many of her points, and I think ultimately we will see much of that reflected when the Canada Water Agency is established. And Mr. Speaker, just in closing, creating the Canada Water Agency presents a unique opportunity for Canada to work with provinces, territories, Indigenous peoples, local authorities, scientists, and others to strengthen collaboration and find the best ways to keep our water safe, clean, and well managed. And Mr. Speaker, as I have said already in my intervention today, we will be seeing some good news in the coming weeks. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the honourable member for her question today.